everyone, Hamer back again with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time I'm doing Season 4, Episode 13, which is called The Amnesiac. So Jim goes to a pool hall for his instructions this time. At least it's empty and there's nobody around, so there's not the blatant security risks that we often see with Jim getting his instructions. The mission is to recover a stash of trivanium, which could be used to develop nuclear weapons, and was stolen from the U.S. by the hostile trio of Alex Vorda, Otto Silf, and Paul Johann. This time Jim goes kind of nuts with American tax dollars by including guest agent Monique, a stunt driver named Jack Ashborough, and the Globe Repertory. In the apartment scene, Jim tells us that Johann killed Silf and hid the trivanium for himself, telling Vorda that Silf has hidden it and was killed in a car accident. Vorda planned to sell it to the UPR agent Paulson in exchange for political support in his country. So off we go to whatever unnamed country we have this week. Jim enters as a doctor specializing in amnesia cases, and we find Major Johann going to a tavern with an agent named Alina Ober. Monique just happens to be the piano player. She names herself Erica, and Willie shuffles a large cabinet around a military establishment, being told to put it back where he found it because he doesn't have a requisition. One guess, no prizes is what happens. Barney emerges in uniform and plants a file for Otto Silf, including Paris's fingerprints. Paris enters the tavern and takes a seat as a caricature artist, while Alina wistfully listens to Monique playing a song that she and Otto used to dance to. Johann encourages her to get over her grief. He invites Monique to join their table, and she does, explaining that she heard that song from a friend some years ago. Paris joins a group as Monique's friend Stefan, as Johann shows Alina a lighter with an inscription and logo from 1965. Alina admires Paris's art, and his skills, mannerisms, and speech reminds her very much of Otto. Alina shows the caricature to Colonel Vorda, who agrees that it's very similar to Otto's style, and the lighter is the same that Vorda gave to Silf once. Vorda says he'll look into it and dismisses Alina. Paulson, the UPR guy, shows up to Vorda's office and says that he's heard that someone is trying to make a deal for the trivanium with the North Asia People's Republic. So there may be something to Alina's story, and tells Vorda he better hurry and find it. Vorda questions Monique about Paris, and as Major Johann arrives, Monique lights a cigarette using the special lighter and tells Vorda that she found Paris at a hospital after he had been in an accident where his face was mangled, and is able to give him the name of a doctor that she remembers at the facility. Thanks to Officer Willie coming by with new phone books, Vorda gets in touch with the doctor, who is Barney, of course, confirming that Paris, as Stefan, was burnt in a fire and his face was reconstructed. Paris is brought in for questioning, and his fingerprints match Silf's file, of course. As Willie and Barney create a fake trivanium container and fill it with water, Paris claims total amnesia and says that if he could remember where the trivanium was hidden, he would tell them, as he has no care for it anymore. Paulson finds a card for Dr. Jim, indicating that Paris has an appointment with him, and he and Vorda go and chat with Jim, who says he would like to help, but Paris's file indicates that he has a brain tumor, and his methods are unlikely to work. Vorda threatens him and demands that he try and get the critical information from Paris quickly, and Jim is forced to accede, but says he'll need every bit of information that Vorda knows if he's going to be successful. Johann confronts Monique about the lighter. It's a clever red herring. He knows it didn't belong to Silf. Monique says that it was all part of her plan. She did know Otto Silf before the accident, and knew that he had a partner for a very lucrative deal, but she didn't know who it was, until now. Johann says she's not really in a position to try and horn in on his deal, but she says she could always go to Vorda. Jim sets up a dog and pony show with Paris using a fancy light setup for the benefit of Vorda and Paulson, trying to trigger his memory, with Paris telling stories from his childhood as Vorda gets increasingly impatient. Suddenly Paris says there's someone in the corner threatening to kill him, so Jim stops the procedure for a bit. Johann arrives, and Paris regards him kind of oddly. Monique calls Johann and demands to see him right away at the tavern, where she points out a bearded Willie who followed Johann there, and says she also has someone on her trail. So they figure that Vorda has discovered something. Johann glumly realizes that he has no chance to sell the trivanium anymore. He's being watched. Monique says that if Silf remembered where it is, Johann would be totally in the clear. Paris then says that he wants to see Erica to make sure she's okay, and Vorta calls her with Johan in the room. Erica prepares to head out, and Johan suddenly realizes there's a perfect opportunity. Erica can tell Sylph where the Trivanium is. Thanks to a carefully placed bug, Barney overhears a location at a military facility and heads out with the repertory with a truck. Monique as Erica meets Paris as Stefan and uses some code words to relay the information given by Johan. Paris starts to tell the story to Jim and Vorta. Monique follows the truck, gaining entry to the facility by showing that she's a general's wife. The IMF's truck is denied entry to the critical building by the guard at first, but stunt driver Jack hits Monique's car, and she feigns being pinned under the car as a distraction, so that Barney can open the door and the truck can get in. Paris finally gets to the critical stage of the story where he and Johan hid the Trivanium in the facility, and then Johan caused the car accident by driving recklessly. Vorta calls Johan and tells him to meet him there, as he tells him to get rid of Paris as he and Paulson leave. They pull up as the IMF are loading up the Trivanium container. Monique is rescued and taken away. Barney puts dust and cobwebs back on the warehouse container and exits through the roof and hops onto the exiting truck. Paulson and Vorta find their prize as Johan arrives, and Vorta predictably shoots him to cover his tracks. Mission accomplished. I'm going to give this episode a grade of B. Like most episodes, I give a grade of B or thereabouts. Got a lot of good, got some not so good. So starting off with the good. First of all, I just want to say that Julie Gregg as Monique in this episode as a female guest agent is excellent. I really like the role that she plays here. I think she's a really great fit for the show. It just seems kind of natural to have her as part of the team, which is not something you can say about a lot of the female agents. One thing I noticed, the guest female agents of this season, that is, one thing I noticed was that unlike, I think, any of the other ladies who've appeared on the show this season, she pulls off some very Cinnamon-esque duty here. By taking a second role towards the end. She starts out as Erica, the piano player, and does that part of her task really well. And then she shows up at the military facility as the general's wife, playing a whole different role. That's something that Barbara Bain as Cinnamon did quite often. And it's interesting. I just noticed that now that, I've commented that many of the female guest agents from this season have been one-dimensional. Their characters have been one-dimensional, and they only play one role. And it's really refreshing to see the female agent here, really being a part of the team, at more than one level. Speaking of which, to kind of roll into that, also really good, this is a Power of 5 episode. Wow, that's refreshing. We haven't seen one of those in a while. All 5 of the main team members have a very significant role to play. Even Willie gets to do quite a bit in this episode. And that's really refreshing. I've really missed that. And, I love it when an episode has that level of teamwork. It's a sign that the team earns their win, and they do. There's some counterpoints to some of what I'm about to say, including this, but I'll come to that later. Also good, the guest stars, Steve Einett and Anthony Zerbe in the same episode. Wow, that's pretty nice because both of these guys are, fantastic. We've seen them in plenty of episodes before. Unfortunately, because of Steve Einett's untimely passing, we won't see him again, but we will see Anthony Zerbe in more episodes coming up in future seasons. Also the good. A few little details in this episode that I really like. At one point, Willie comes by Colonel Vorta's office with some new phone books. And, for maybe some of the younger viewers who are watching this video, you're thinking, what's a phone book? Well, believe it or not, There was a point before cell phones where you actually had to use landlines, and you didn't just automatically know everybody's number. You actually had to sometimes look up the number in a phone book, and that's where you would find people's phone numbers. I know it's kind of a weird concept in 2022, but that's what you did. And Willie coming by right at that point and saying, "Hey, I've got your new phone book for you," just at the right time, so that when Colonel Vorta asks his secretary to find the doctor that Monique tips them off to, she's able to do it because his name is in the phone book and his number is in the phone book, which is kind of neat. Also towards the end, where the IMF has basically done the swap of the trivanium containers, Barney has a device that shoots dust and cobwebs and things like that, and kind of makes it look like, the container's been there for years, which is neat. That's a nice touch. That would have been a very, very easy thing to overlook potentially, but, some great planning by the IMF there. So with all that good, I'm going to point out some things that are not so good. These are not really deal breakers. In a sense, it's still a good episode. But I think that, these are things that definitely do need to be pointed out. First of all, I pointed out that it's really nice to have Steve Einert and Anthony Zerbe, on our screen. Nothing wrong with that. But in an episode like this, where you have two really strong antagonists, that can be a problem. There have been a couple of episodes like that. The one that I remember is back in season 2 called Trek, where, the IMF is basically trying to work against two guys who are going after the same, MacGuffin, the same thing. And then it becomes a question of, they both have kind of, competing goals. And it's really a question of it becomes problematic, I think, a little bit, because we're not really sure, so we're rooting against both guys. Am I supposed to root more against this guy or that guy? And that can sometimes be problematic. I think it is in this episode, because one of these guys is going to kind of win, or maybe, it's possible, I suppose, that both of them could lose. In a sense, they both kind of do, because, one of the guys gets shot, and the other guy is obviously going to have a huge problem when, this agent from the UPR realizes that they've been duped. That's not going to be very good for him at all. So you could say that they're both losers in a sense. But still, for the purposes of the plot and for the purposes of the episode, it's difficult to pull off that kind of episode where there's two, competing antagonists that the IMF is going after. Kind of as an adjunct to that, the plot is too convoluted for its own good here. It really is. I mean, the way I've outlined it, and I've seen the episode enough times to be able to say, okay, I can follow what's going to happen. Yeah, I kind of remember this. I kind of remember that. But it can be a little bit difficult to follow in terms of, okay, so it kind of reminds me of some action movies where, if you don't follow the plot really, really closely, you have people in the audience who kind of like, you're saying to each other, oh, why is that guy doing this, and who's that guy, and what's this, and I thought he was with them, and now he's with them, like, what's going on? And there's a little bit of that here. I think that the plot is somewhat too convoluted for its own good at some levels. A final thing, those things can be overcome because, like I said, it's a decent enough episode, and I think that the acting and the screenplay and the story is good enough to overcome those. The bigger thing that I found to be disappointing with this episode, there's a lovely lady named Elizabeth Hush who plays Alina Ober in this episode. And I was really, really wishing right from the very beginning that she could have had a bigger role in this episode. And I was, because I don't know why I felt that at first. I really don't. But then later on, it really kind of struck me, because when during the scene where Major Johan Steve Einig's character, is talking to Monique about how they're being followed, and the jig was kind of up in terms of them actually being able to profit from, you know, what Major Johann did. They come together and they try to get and say that, well, there's a plan that, you know what, if this Trivanium is found, then you're off the hook. That's what Monique tells him. And I just found that kind of weird, because I was thinking to myself, even before it actually happened, why in the world would Johann think that he would be completely off the hook? Why would he think that Vorta wasn't going to kill him after the Trivanium was found? It appears to me that he was under the impression that Otto Sylph, Paris, was actually a full amnesiac. Couldn't remember anything. And so, you know, he was relying on the idea that Monique would just tell him, give Paris the information, the Trivanium would be found, and that would be the end of that. Why? I just kind of can't see that. Especially when he gets a call a little bit later, and Vorta tells him, hey, I found it. Come meet me there. Why would Johann do that? You know, he's putting himself in harm's way. It was just so blatantly obvious. And Major Johann is a smart guy. Why would he put himself in that position? It really didn't make sense. Even just on Monique's say-so, even if somehow, you know, her story is able to convince him that it's okay. Part of it is that Paris let slip during, you know, the whole dog and pony show that he and Jim put on, that, you know, after the Trivanium was stored in this military facility, Major Johann started to drive recklessly and caused a car accident and that sort of thing to try and cover up the theft. Okay, I just can't believe that Vorta would not have kind of suspected that from the beginning, even if at some level he did believe Johann's story. The whole thing just doesn't kind of jive together for me, and I think that that is a major plot flaw here. To kind of tie together the previous point that I made, you know, Johann trusts Monique and her story way too easily. And I had mentioned previously about how I really wished that Alina, this character, who also knew Otto Sylph, had a bigger role. And I really think that that is the place where she could have had it. Had she kind of stuck around to have maybe even one scene where, you know, she kind of, you know, lent credence to what Monique was saying, in terms of, yeah, you know what, she could do something or other to try and strengthen this idea in Major Johann's head that, yeah, you know what, this isn't really Otto anymore. He's really forgotten everything. He doesn't remember this. He doesn't remember that. Just a little scene like that would really, really would have helped to make that a little bit more convincing, and would have kind of solidified the deal as to why Johann was willing to believe that he could probably just completely get off the hook. I think it just wasn't right that he just trusted Monique blindly, in a sense, to, you know, proceed with the plan and think that he's completely out of danger. So that really kind of, I really do feel that would have brought it all together. Hope that makes sense. Anyway, I'll stick with my grade of B for this one. Good overall episode, you know, despite that plot flaw. I'll leave it at that. Thank you as always for watching. Please like this episode. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and please leave your comments, and I will see you next time.